Hi, how's everybody doing today? I'd like to welcome you to our Chemical Approvals Forms Process Workflows Made Easy Chemwatch webinar. We appreciate your attendance. Today, your speakers will be Tom Hassey, Business Development Manager out of our Michigan office, myself, Paul Benbow, Business Development Manager, and doing the heavy lifting today will be Augusta Brindley. She's our Technical Products Manager, and she is doing most of the demo today. One small note before we get started, on your GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar control panel, there's a little red arrow at the upper right. You can click on that and it'll kick out. And at the bottom of that is a little place for you to submit questions. We encourage you to ask questions during the presentation, and we will compile those questions at the end and we'll go through them and do a Q&A at the very end. So we've got a pretty full agenda today, so we're going to just jump right into it. So today's subject is chemical approvals, and we're going to discuss the building blocks used to create a simple and scalable approval system that aligns chemical management processes to the organization, processes, and procedures. And many of the pieces of this are forms, workflows, safety data sheet and documents, regulations, reports, alerts, and workflows. But before we jump right into it, Chemwatch is a privately held company. We've been in the marketplace for about 28 years. We're an international company with 4 U.S. locations, 21 offices around the world. We got our start in the Asia-Pacific rim and European rim, so we're not as well known in the U.S., but we are probably the largest chemical management company in the world. Of the Fortune 500 companies, if you narrow down to the Fortune 20, we are in the top 7 of the top 20. So we work very well in large companies. We work very well in small companies. We're software as a service based. Software as a service tends to lend very well to scaling. So if you're a smaller company that wants approvals or a very large multinational company, we have experience and we have a solution for you. Our customers include oil and gas, automotive, mining, aerospace, governments, research institutions, hospitals. So anybody with governments, anybody with chemicals, they can use our products. Okay. Mr. Tom, you want to take it away from here?
Sure. Thank you, Paul. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for spending your time with us. So chemical approvals, really, this is the starting activity in terms of a chemical management cycle. That is, a management cycle of your chemicals starts with the evaluation of products and substances, and that's what a good approval system does. But it also serves as a pull mechanism to pull this approval, so to speak, through your organization and make sure that all stakeholders have a say and a buy-in in terms of its acceptance. So an effective approval systems integrates the EHS review process, the regulatory, supply chain, and product management objectives of the company, and more importantly, organizational structures. It aligns itself, the approval system aligns chemical management with the organizational structures, businesses, processes, and procedures. So in summation, the approvals process is an evaluation process driven by regulations, policies, and procedures, many of which are required to be GHS compliant. So before we talk about the approvals framework, I want to spend a few minutes on approval criterion. That is, depending on the type of approvals process you want to invoke, there's certain resources and information that you want to be able to access, and then required actions within the approval criteria. So an example with regulations, the data you need is up-to-date SDS, ingredients. You need to understand ingredients because regulations affect CAS numbers, obviously, and the CAS numbers are ingredients within your SDS. You got to have up-to-date regulatory databases. In our company alone, we probably pull in 40 to 50 new regulations or regulatory updates every week. And you need classified chemical families because regulations tend to affect clusters of chemicals. So the actions are basically the approval within the approval process is, as an example, check each ingredient against a list of concern and make sure that the chemical families that you're using are covered by these regs. And to ensure alerts when the status changes, as we just mentioned, in the world we're in, that is, we have a lot of this obviously established countries, but we have a lot of emerging and growing countries. And as they move into the middle class, creations tends to explode. So without reading all the details here, you can see there's specific resources and required actions that are specific to the type of approval process that you want to put together. So the framework, it's really breaking out into about 8 blocks, 8 steps. We'll go through each step, what we call building block, and then talk a little bit about, well, basically its description, what exactly was meant, let's say in this case by a form, and what's its function within an approval system. And what I'll do is I'm going to go through each of these in detail in the following slides, but quickly you can see when you build forms, what you're attempting to do is capture all the criteria with checklists, attachments, any requests or comments that are part of this approval of this substance. The SDS data, you got to have up-to-date data, and you got to have the ability to extract that data and capture its formulations. Regulations, we talked earlier about regulatory comparison, but also you have to have an ability to have an alerts function, an ability to red flag changes automatically. So what I'm going to do here in the next few minutes is step through each of the 8 steps and talk a little bit more in detail as to exactly what they are. So I'm going to start with forms. Forms, essential part. Quite frankly, this is the data capturing schema for your approval system. This is what's used to generate reports and documents. It directs the workflow. Actually, it's the pull mechanism, because at each stage, the forms capture the data that the stakeholder needs to either accept or reject. So again, forms, multiple forms, you can assign those to one or many stakeholders across the entire process. So, and forms can be, hate to use that word, it can be in many forms. As you can see, you can do picks, drop-down menus, input texts, and also within these forms, these fields, you can make them mandatory to force people to say, for instance, what location does that chemical need to be used at? Next step, SDS data. We talked briefly about that. That is the key component behind the entire approvals process. So after forms, next is capturing or managing the SDS data. So particular points of interest to approval system stakeholders within the SDS data point fields are ingredient formulation, its physical properties, DOT related data, the DG data, and then the hazard analysis done by the vendor. So based on this information, now you can develop the extensive review process can now, let's say, integrate or tap into other databases that affect that SDS data, for instance, regulatory databases, classification rules, transport databases, and a company's own internal database. The third step is regulations. This is another key stage of the approval process because, as the audience knows all too well, this is a very dynamic field right now. Lots of evolution occurring in terms of new regulations, but old ones being revised. And it's a critical part of the approval system because regulations affect your SDS ingredients, and you have to know, quite frankly, in real time, what is going on in the regulatory world as it affects your ingredients. So an approval system with the regulation step ensures that you're in compliance with local, national, or global regs. And we recommend an automated use of a database. Why? It allows access in real time for the up-to-date regs outside your local jurisdiction. It automatically provides updates. As we all know, this data changes often and requires constant maintenance. And it also allows easy search and locating of regulatory data using basic identifiers as we see here, specific to CAS number, because certainly that's what the regulation is tied to specifically within your SDS ingredient or your SDS data. Next step, reports. This is quite frankly the output of the approval process in terms of capturing SDS data and then does some calculations, extraction in terms of what the specific stakeholders are looking for. So as an example is some of the forms, some of the outputs are sorry, some of the information that is outputted in reports are from the forms, of course, the SDS regs and internal data. And then these forms can look like environmental reports. Sorry, these reports can look like environmental reports or your standard operating procedure for that substance, specific or a summary of your PPE requirements, tox and eco-tox data, and of course, regulatory reports. So each report can be set as one of the key sources to review. You can requiring sign off and approval, sort of the marker of your system. Alerts. This is important because all good systems with good intentions have events that occur that happen outside of the standard approval process. So some of these special conditions or situations are delays in processing, a significant regulatory concern, an internal HSC concern. There's maybe some financial or business risk. There could be a vendor risk. So these special conditions can trigger automated alerts or notifications. I do know some customers, in terms of vendor risk, have a flag, quite frankly, when they go 90 days past paying. So you can extend this alert into many aspects within the business, but being flagged, quite frankly, initially from the chemical approval process. Workflows. This is, quite frankly, the, we'll call it the pull mechanism itself of an approvals process. It really governs and directs all the other steps of the approval system and is the secret sauce, so to speak, behind the automation of the entire approval process. So it's logic, if you want to call it if then else. Basically, that's what it's doing. So it governs, directs, combines all your components. It directs the approval stages, the actions, the transition between stages, what some people like to call gates. Workflows govern the approval rules and regs, the stakeholder tasks, what needs to be done, and their actions afterward. So it combines flows, documents, and reports, along with the outputs, the actions and action streams. So workflows, they provide the tools and functionality to translate any process into a systemic stream of tasks, actions, and alerts. Dashboards. So escalation actually is just a specific occurrence within the approval process. It's a step for some folks, but typically it's more of a option. But dashboards, this is very important in the sense that it helps visualize your approval process. It shows you where the decision point is, but also it's a summary of all the requests, durations, how long are the reviews taking. You can break it down by stage, task, or action, exactly what's occurring at that time, how many new requests over time, resolve requests over time. So what visualization does for any process is it's intuitive to all levels of an organization. Anybody with, depending on their background or interest, can look at the visualization part of the approvals process and understand exactly where things are at. So the good news is I don't have to show you any more slides for now, and that we get into the actual interesting part, and that is the demonstration of our approvals process. And Augusta, take it away.
Hi everyone. So as Tom mentioned, I'm going to run you through a basic demonstration of our approvals workflow. Additionally, I'm also going to touch on how you can create this workflow within the master system settings. So our approvals module is built into our Chemwatch package, and it can be accessed directly from the product interface via the module ribbon over here. So you'll see this is where you can actually access the approvals module. Additionally, within our master system settings, you are able to build out your workflow according to the specifications needed at your site. So we have a tool that's called our approvals constructor, and this is what allows you to build out your workflow according to your site's needs. So you'll notice here within our approvals constructor that the workflow is composed of various stages. And within each of the stages that I've built out in our workflow, I have assigned various actions, which are essentially just tasks within that stage, in which the stakeholder assigned to that stage is going to perform. So you'll see here that you can actually include various action items within each stage. As Tom mentioned, we have form templates and various reports built into this workflow, so you can use those. Additionally, within our workflow, we also have the ability to transition items according to certain criteria. So you'll see here that we actually can have the system automatically pre-screen chemicals based on whether they're on a particular regulatory list or whether the user has answered a question on a particular form. And that essentially can dictate the path of a material. So we can do this again based on regulatory list, based on an answer given on a form, or based on a tag type or a query that's built within the system. So you'll see here, this is where the magic happens within the system. Now, I mentioned that you can also build forms. So you'll notice here within the master system settings, you can actually build out forms that are based on criteria that you need to capture for your organization. Now, that might be specific to maybe regulation that your industry needs to abide by, or it just might be business specific. So you'll see here, I have some forms that I have created within my system. Again, you would build these out to be based on your own specifications. And here within the form builder, you are able to essentially decide what you would like to include within that form. So this is an example form that I have created, and you'll see here that I've actually used the fields provided in the system, such as plain input text fields, multi-line text fields, check boxes and menus, radio buttons, drop-down menus, date pickers, and upload buttons in order to create this form. Now, I'm able to specify the question of the form and also specify what information you would like to capture within the form. You can easily add or omit items using the add field button, or you can use this to omit and update that form as your needs change. Now, once this form is built out, you can actually incorporate that into your approvals workflow. And again, use these fields to capture information that's important to your organizational goals and objectives. Now, to give you an idea of how this workflow works, let's go ahead and launch into a basic demo of an example workflow. So today I'm going to show you a linear workflow. So this is one of the more basic workflows that you can build out in our system. But just again, keep in mind, we have tools available to be able to handle complex workflows and complex paths as well. So this is the default workflow that is provided with our system. You'll see that it's a 4-stage workflow, and it includes a request stage. This is stage 1, and you'll see that there are action steps included within that stage. As with all of the other stages, again, you are in charge of just deciding which stakeholder or user needs to perform particular actions or tasks within each stage. You'll see that it's going to move in this direction, so it's going to go from the request stage to the management review to an environmental review, and then finally the health and safety executive or review team will approve the item to go within the master system folders. Now again, this is just an example, but just keep in mind this is what we're going to be showing you today in the demo. Now you'll see here that I've created the workflow path. Again, it's built out of stages. I have my users, and all of those users are going to have individual logins. Keep in mind that you can make this user-based, or this could be based on a particular role or group. Those stakeholders can be various users within your system. So I'm going to log in as a basic user, and within this basic user, I'm going to initiate a chemical request. So in this case, I'm going to search for an item within our full library. So this is an item that has not been approved before, and I'm going to request that it be added to the system folders. So you'll see the first step is just locating the material within the full database, or you can have a catalog of items in which users can choose from. So you'll see here that I'll locate the SDS that I would like to send through the approvals process, and I'll just simply right-click on that item in order to pull up the chemical approvals request. So you'll see once that I find that item, I can actually send this to approvals. Now I'm going to send it on a material level, and you'll notice that this will launch into our approvals workflow. Again, this is the first stage in the workflow, and within this stage, I have various action steps that I need to perform. Now, this is the form which I created within Form Builder as an administrator, and this is required to be filled out by this basic user. So you'll see that I have included instructions for the user. It's asking for a request date, so we'll go ahead and put in today's date. It's asking for the requester to give their name. Now, again, this could be associated with that user's login, or that user could be associated with a role or group, so they might need to specify their specific name and their area. Additionally, it's asking who their manager is, and this is just an example of a form that you can build out. It's going to ask questions about that material, and they're going to be required to fill out this information. And again, this is going to be based on your organizational needs and objectives. After they're done filling out the form, you'll see that they can submit that. Now, in this case, this form, none of these are required fields. However, if they were required, you would see a little asterisk next to the question, and this would indicate to the user that that's required before they can move to the next action step. If they didn't complete that required field, then the system would prompt them to complete all required fields before moving on to the next stage. Now, in order to move on to the next stage, we just simply need to go to this next button. In this particular example, it's asking the requester to specify the area in which they would like to bring this chemical on site. So in this case, we're going to place it in area 2. It's going to prompt the user to add a volume or weight to be stored with this item once it's approved. Additionally, this can be used during the review process. So stakeholders can review the amount that is intended to be brought on site. Once the user has completed the form and also filled out the volume and weight and location information, they will be able to give a notification or a note to the next stakeholder in the stage. So we'll go ahead and say, please review this material for on-site procurement. And this note will be sent to the next stakeholder within the next stage. So you'll see here that it's going to display those items that this particular user has requested. It will also display a status. So if that has been approved or rejected, they will be notified of that. Additionally, if it's been canceled, they'll be able to view that here as well. They can also review these independently through these tabs. So again, they can see all of those items that have been reviewed, approved, rejected, or canceled. Now, to move on to the next stage, we're going to go ahead and log in as our next user, and you'll see that this is going to be the manager. Now, the manager will receive a notification in his email if a note has been applied to that particular approval, and the note will look very similar to this. So you'll see that in the email, they will have a note that gives an idea of the material information associated with that and where it is in the process. Now they can click on this link to go directly to their approvals module, or they can just log into their system using their standard login and then access that approval through this approvals module. So you'll see here that they just simply need to go to their approvals module and they'll be able to see the pending request. Now you'll see in this case they have multiple requests here. In this case, this is the request that we just sent through. This particular manager is required to review the form in read-only mode, so you can decide whether this form is going to be editable or read-only. So you'll go ahead and see that they can review the location as well. They can also review the placarding information, including the maximum volume or weight. They also have various reports in which they are able to review. So in this case, we have this particular user reviewing the incompatibility report. So based on the area or location that this was placed in, you'll see that it's going to review all of the items that are already placed in that location, and it's going to notify the user where incompatibilities exist with this particular substance. You'll also see that you can include other types of actions, and one of those is a risk assessment. So within this example, you'll see that I have the user performing a risk assessment. So essentially, they're going to indicate the environment and manner in which this particular substance is used, and have that risk assessment follow this chemical into the folder feature of the main module. Once they're done performing the risk assessment, you'll go ahead and say this risk assessment is complete, and then they will be able to submit that onto the next stage. So again, this will go to the next stakeholder in the environmental stage. They can reject it, so this would end the process completely, or they can return it to the basic user for modifications. In this case, we're going to submit it to the next stage. So in this case, I'm going to say, I have reviewed the material. And so here in this particular example, I have said that I've reviewed the material and everything looks good. Please note that this material needs this specific type of respirator for this area. So I'm going to go ahead and pass that note on to the next stage, and you'll see here that this has been passed on to the next stage, and I can actually review the items I have within my queue again, as I did earlier in the basic user view. Now, once that has been passed on to the next stage, you'll see that I can log in as the next user. Again, they will receive the notification or email alert that's associated with the pending request. They can again click on that email link, or they can just log into their system as I did now. Cindy, this user, is actually the environmental review person, so you'll see that this is their environmental review stage. And she again has some actions and tasks that she needs to perform. In this case, she's again reviewing that same form. You can have them all review the same form or multiple forms depending on their job function. I have her also reviewing the environmental report that's associated with this item. So it's important to note that all of those reports that you see within our main module and also those emergency reports are able to be integrated into this process. So they can actually review that throughout the approvals process. Again, I have the option to submit, reject, or return that. In this case, I'm going to submit that onto the next stage. In this case, I'm going to note that this should not be discharged in the sewer or waterways, and it's not a marine pollutant, and I will pass that information on to the next stakeholder within the stage. So we're going to go ahead and submit that. It's gone to the next stage, and the final review stage is our EHS personnel. So this is the person who is going to approve that item. Again, he will be able to access all of his pending approvals through his particular view. His view is going to look a little different because he has an admin view. So you'll see that there's an additional tab here at the top. So he'll be able to see information about all of the requests that have gone through the approvals process, and he'll be able to see information about each of those requests. This will include information such as an ID number, the stage name, the action name, the approval name, where it was placed, so the location of the material name, and who requested it. They can see the status of each approval and then also see the history, so all of the comments that were made during each of those stages. In this case, we're going to view the pending item that we've sent through the last stage. So it came from the environmental review, and now we're in EHS. So again, you can have one or multiple stakeholders in charge of performing these reviews. Again, he's reviewing this form to make sure that all of the information is captured and everything is as it needs to be. He also is going to review the mini SDS. So you'll see that he's going to be in charge of reviewing all of the hazard information associated with this particular chemical. And then he's also going to be in charge of reviewing the firefighting report. So he'll have a complete report. He'll know whether or not this is going to be appropriate for that area and whether he has the appropriate emergency response equipment available in that area. Now, if everything is as it needs to be, he can approve it, reject it, or return it to a previous stage. Additionally, he can also view comments that were made by other stakeholders in previous stages, so he can see all of those comments that were made previously by those other stakeholders. And if any other documents were attached, he can see those as well. Now, these can be viewed in every single stage. Now, once I approve this item, it's going to be placed in my chemical folders in the destination folder that was specified by the user upstream. So we're going to say that it looks good and that it's approved. And then we're going to decide whether we would like to notify users upstream. So we're going to go ahead and say that we're going to notify all of the users involved, and they'll receive an email saying that item has been approved and it has been placed in its destination folder. So that is a review of how a basic approval process could work. Again, it is composed of various stages. Within those stages, you have actions, and then you can decide how that workflow is going to be built out according to your business needs. Now, between each of those stages, you have transitions, and there's multiple ways that we can transition items between individual stages. And again, that could be based on just various criteria. So that could be based on something that's built into the form, based on whether it's on a particular chemical list, or based on other criteria. So next we're going to move into the slides that are associated with approval stages, and we're going to discuss that, and then Paul is going to conclude the webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Gusty. Can you see my slide, my screen?
I can now, yes.
Okay, great. We'll take it away for 2 more slides and I'll pick it up.
Okay. Just to review what you saw during the demo, we've talked about this several times. We have 3 basic elements to our approvals workflow. Again, these are stages, actions, and transitions. So again, those stages are going to be built out based on your organizational processes. You're going to have actions, and these are going to include some of the tasks that you saw during our demo. And that's going to include things like filling out a custom form that you've created within your form builder. You can check incompatibilities, as I showed you. You can perform risk assessments, among other tasks. We also, again, have those transitions that essentially just direct the chemical down a particular workflow path. And again, this path can be linear in nature, or we can customize that to be directed down, another path. So for instance, if it's already been purchased before, you might want it to go directly to your purchasing department instead of having to go through your EHS and environmental department every single time, since they've already approved that material. This next slide is just another example of how that workflow can be built out. So in this slide, it illustrates again how a basic request and review works within our workflow. So for example, the requester in this scenario is prompted to attach an SDS, complete a form, and select a location, and also decide what folder it's going to be placed in. The request is then submitted to another stakeholder, in this case a manager review, and then the manager has its own unique action steps that need to be performed. So in this example, the manager must review the SDS, perform a risk assessment, and review the compatibility report associated with this material. So after these action steps are performed, the stakeholder can again either approve or reject that. And just keep in mind, this is completely customizable. These are just examples of how you can build these out. You can kind of cherry pick what particular action items that you need to have in each of your stages. You can have as many stages as you would like, or you can keep it as the scenario that you see on the screen. As simple as having a requester and an approver. It's totally up to you. Now, Paul, you can go on and continue with the rest of the slides.
Great job, Gusty, as always. So I guess it kind of leads us toward the the home stretch of the webinar, and that's how can Chemwatch help? Just to tell you a little bit about Chemwatch, we have really strong data. We have about 30 million vendor SDSs in our database. We also have a regulatory database that ties into our vendor database, and these things work together. We also have about 170 employees at Chemwatch, and more than IT people, we have chemists and occupational health and safety experts. So our platform is also based on the Amazon Web Services, AWS. It's managed and it's fully scalable, so we can handle small companies or large companies. So I like this slide, but I don't like this slide because it's very busy. But the net of this slide is that because we house everything in one central database, the entire Chemwatch application was written by one team of programmers from the ground up. So it wasn't like we acquired a company and tried to bring their technology in and mesh it into somebody else's technology or technology we already had, which can kind of not work well for the user, because a user may be required to cut and paste or move information from one system to another even though you bought from the same company. That doesn't happen in Chemwatch because everything is basically in one central location. And from that, we can create inventory information, labels, risk assessments, inventory management. So we kind of have this in two parts, internal challenges and external challenges. But to us, it's all easily solved because we keep everything in one place. So it's in the cloud, regulatory data, your data, data that's unique to your company, all that stuff happens, and then we're able to control and divvy out information as needed. But the net of all this is it makes it more productive for you and your employees. So kind of expanding on our largest database piece, 30 million vendor SDSs. We have about 6,100 regulatory databases that we keep updated daily. We keep the vendor SDSs current for you. So anytime there's an update from a vendor, we would actually get that vendor SDS, and then you would get an email saying, hey, this vendor SDS is more current, and then you can decide which one you want to be the newer one. One thing we didn't talk about much today is our gold SDSs, and that's about 350,000 SDSs that we've reauthored by our scientists. And a gold SDS is a vendor neutral. We're not trying to sell any product. We're just letting you know what information is about this chemical, be it toxicological data, safety information, PPE. So we're neutral. We're just giving you information for worker safety, worker health. We don't really have a dog in that fight of trying to sell it. So we tie all this to CAS numbers, and this also is pointing to our regulatory database. So we can leverage this information to tell you if you have information or if you have a chemical that is not in compliance or maybe on a list of concern. Our gold SDSs have a unique ability to go between languages and countries. So we have all 16 sections done, and we can move between 93 different country formats in 47 languages. Gold information allows us to create emergency reports in 47 languages. Our mini SDSs are really popular. PPE information, first aid, firefighting, standard operating procedures. So our gold SDSs are really, really good. Lastly is our data. We have about 6,100 regulatory databases. So part of our strategy is that we have our own regulatory database, and we can use that regulatory database to leverage our data or your data that's in our system. So we can tell you things that you have that are maybe on a list of concern, and that list may change tomorrow, and then the next day you would get an automatic update on our screen. And there's several ways we could do that, but having our own regulatory database inside the same servers allows us to do that. And we have about 20 plus regulatory compliance people that's their whole job, is to keep what we call our Galleria Chemica product current. So, instead of you trying to keep track of all this stuff, our goal is to say, let us do this for you. You'll stay current and you will look good in your job, and we will basically allow you to do other things with that time that you've freed up. So like I mentioned, we have chemical data from 93 countries, 47 languages, and our gold SDSs, we can move between that. But even vendor data, whatever you put in our system, we can tell you as much as we can based on how much data we extract from that vendor data sheet. So once again, we have chemists, toxicologists, hygienists, regulatory experts, occupational safety health specialists, physicians. So we have 170 employees, but we have people that really understand chemists, chemistry, chemicals. Anyway, and kind of, you're looking at this slide, it is kind of an eye chart, and I apologize for that, but the net is we have a way to create whatever you need. Because we're .NET, we can basically take our application and say, you just want this module, you just want approvals and risk assessment and maybe SDS management. Well, we can actually create a package for you to do that. So anyway, looks like we're right on time. So I'd like to open up the question and answer session.
Yes, I have a question that's put forth. You describe the approval process as a sequential process with one stage each sequence. Can we have multiple stakeholders at one stage, aka a parallel?
Yes, we can do that for you.
And that one kind of goes hand in glove with a question I saw on the sheet that said, you know, if an approver is on vacation, how does that impact the approvals process? Would you go ahead and answer that one too, Gusty?
Yeah, so we actually are able to have multiple stakeholders assigned to the stage. Essentially, that stakeholder would have access to approving items in the event that that person is out for, you know, a short amount of time or an extended period of time. We can accommodate for both. Our workflow constructor is very versatile, so you can have linear paths going back to the first question. You can have parallel paths. You can have that be redirected down different paths based on the criteria associated with the material. And then within those stages, you can have stakeholders assigned to those. It could be a single stakeholder or it could be multiple stakeholders. That allows you to have the flexibility to have multiple people approve items that are going through that stage.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I know we do really well with our approvals package. To my knowledge, and I'm sure there is one somewhere, so I shouldn't make this broad of a statement, but we've been able to accommodate everybody's needs, and kind of tailor the system that would mimic existing system, be it what your form looks like, how the workflow works. You're probably replacing some kind of a system you have in place now that's not working well, or you're trying to do something. But we've been very successful at going into organizations and causing minimal amounts of changes because our system is so flexible and we can tailor it to meet your needs, as opposed to here's our solution, you just have to kind of do it the way it does it because that's how it does it. Anyway, I had a second question, and I think you covered this one already, Gusty, but maybe you could just touch on it again. Can the system automatically decide if a chemical needs more approvals than another?
More approvals.
I guess they're asking if it's a chemical that's not toxic, does that have a simpler path?
Yes. So there's definitely ways where you can redirect items based on criteria associated with the material. So as I described earlier, if, for instance, that item has already been approved in another folder and you don't want it to go down the EHS and the environmental review stage, you can have a conditional form built into your workflow that essentially will direct it directly to purchasing, and then purchasing can approve that and have it placed in folders. So depending on that conditional form that's built into the system, it can be redirected down either a path that has several different stages downstream or a path that leads directly to its approval. And we would work with you to build that out.
Okay. I have a couple questions. Do you have single sign-on capability? Yes, we do. Do you use Shibboleth programming to perform SSO? I will contact our IT team and send that answer to everybody. By the way, any question out here, we will answer with a written response. If you submit a question and you want just a private answer, please say so in the question box. Another question I have is, can I import my own forms into your approval process module?
You can build them out within our form builder, so it will allow you to build out those forms within the form builder based on the forms that you are already using within your organization.
Another question just came in. Will you send us the presentation slides? Absolutely. You will get the slides, and also you will have a link to this recording.
And I have one more. The system provides for email and using the system platform to interact with the approvals. Do we have to buy a license for each approver? You want to take that one real quick, Gusty? I know the answer to that, but I'll let you.
The licensing is based on concurrent user usage, so it just depends on how often those users are going to be logging into the system. So you would not have to have a license for every stakeholder because those stakeholders would be logging in at different times. Your overall concurrent user usage would be low. So that's the number of users that are logged into the system at any given time. So you could have hundreds of users in the system and have maybe like 20 seats that everyone share.
Thank you, Gusty. I have actually 2 more questions. Those system changes you have mentioned be considered customized or configurable. Everything you've seen has been configurable, that you can configure the module to do what you want based on what we've been showing you. This is a SaaS application, cloud hosted, and it is multi-tenant.
Great. Okay, well, I see we're getting close to running out of time, so let me go ahead and finish this up. Does anybody have any more questions, Gusty or Tom, before we push on?
No more have been submitted, folks. If you want, this is now the time.
Okay. Well, let me finish up then. I guess the next order of business is our next webinar, November 14th. And IFC and DHS reporting, we have a new module that we're introducing. It's very exciting. We've had a lot of interest in this. And basically, it's helping you stay compliant, using the power of the computer, turning it back on itself. We capture all this data, and we're always looking for ways to say, well, this gives our customers heartburn. This is a lot of work. How can we make that better for you? So I think you'll enjoy our next presentation. Same time, we try to do it on Tuesdays or Thursdays. So Tuesday the 14th, and you'll get a login for that one, just like this one. Look for that in your email. And that being said, we appreciate you joining us and look forward to seeing you next time. And please reach out to any of us. We'll send an email with our contact information, and we're happy to help. Thank you again for the time of your day, and hope you have a nice lunch.